Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Post with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Folks, I'm so excited today to be joined by my friend Jacob Jarreau, former coach of the Loggers in 2017 in La Crosse, Wisconsin. That's how we connected. Currently a sales rep for BSN in Albuquerque, New Mexico resident. Great friend of mine. Great to welcome you back, Jarreau. How's it been? It's been a while since you've been on the pod.
Yeah, thanks for having me back on, Billy. Always like to talk to you, kind of break down some things, hear your outrageous takes. But uh, we always text each other throughout the year and kind of stay up to date with stuff. So it's always good to get on the pod and actually talk about some things in the public space.
Yeah, for sure. We keep in touch, so it doesn't feel like it's been a while since you've been on the podcast. Well, you're one of the biggest college football fans I know, and I wanted to have you on here to talk about the college football playoff that is going to take place on January 1st, 2024, New Year's Day. Alabama, number 4, takes on undefeated number 1 Michigan, and then the other semifinal, you've got number 3 Texas against number 2 Washington. Before we get to those specific matchups, I wanted to first talk to you, of course, about the playoff in general. It's the last year of the 14 playoff. Next year, it goes to 12 teams. I have to ask you the question that's been of a hot debate topic over the last couple of weeks. Did Florida State get screwed? I mean, this was a team, again, that went undefeated in the ACC, although, to be fair, the ACC, probably the weakest Power 5 conference. I think the big reason that everyone's talking about is the fact that Jordan Travis, their starting quarterback, got injured shortly before the season ended, I think with 3 games to go. Florida State manages to finish undefeated, but a lot of people are saying, well, the committee didn't want to put a Florida State team that had a backup quarterback and could very well get blown out by one of these other teams. But other people are saying, look, you play the games, you play to win the game. They were undefeated. What else do you want them to do? So where do you fall on that debate? Did Florida State get screwed, or do you think the committee made the right decision?
I think Florida State was definitely deserving of it. Would it have been the best playoff? I don't think so. And unfortunately, college football is very TV driven, and the ratings probably would not have done as well if the Florida State backup or even third string is playing against Michigan. So unfortunately, Florida State got screwed. But I also think the committee did pick the 4 best teams, which are you picking the best teams or the most deserving teams? That's kind of the debate. And I mean, there's instances of this in the past with Ohio State back a couple years ago when their quarterback was out and Cardale Jones stepped in and ended up leading them to a national title. I think that was a little different because in the Big Ten championship game, they beat Wisconsin 55-7. And this year, the Florida State backup squeaked by a decent Louisville team. Obviously, Louisville ranked, good power rankings team. I don't think, like you said, in that weak ACC this year, they really proved themselves to be a top 15 team. So I think that ranking is a little bit phony, in my opinion. So it's unfortunate because you feel bad for the players. They went undefeated. If you told me at the beginning of the season, if you were a head coach and you told your team to go, hey, you guys go undefeated and beat everyone, and you beat 3 or 4 ranked teams, but you're not going to make it to the playoff, I think they would call you crazy. So it's an unfortunate situation, but next year it's going to be different. I think next year we'll be debating the 10, 11, 12 teams getting in, not the 4 seed getting in.
Yeah, I agree with you because, again, the key is the 4 best teams, not the 4 most deserving teams. And let's be honest, I don't think anyone wanted to see Florida State be in the playoff and get blown out like TCU did in the championship last year. So I think the committee made the right decision to leave them out. I did want to ask you about Georgia, though. I mean, this was a team that obviously the reigning 2-time defending champion. They won, 29 games in a row, undefeated going into the SEC title game, but the Bulldogs lose to Nick Saban and the Alabama Crimson Tide. They end up going from number 1 to out of the playoff. Do you agree with that decision? Because, again, when you look at the teams that made it, the Pac-12 champion, the Big 12 champion, the SEC champion, the Big 10 champion, you see it like, okay, these are all 4 Power 5 champions. But if you look at 4 best teams, I mean, I think it's hard to argue Georgia wasn't one of the 4 best teams. So what do you think about that? Do you think they made the right decision to leave Georgia out?
I think they did. That's another unfortunate situation. It's the timing of your loss. Alabama loses early in the season and then wins out. And this is also a wacky year too. This is the first year we've had this many undefeated teams this late into the season. I feel like this was the first year that going into championship weekend, there was legitimately 7 or 8 teams that could have made the playoff depending on the different scenarios. Whereas last year, Ohio State loses the big one, and they end up still sneaking in because the 5, 6, 7, 8 seeds were 2, 3 loss teams. So this was just almost a perfect storm for the committee because of how good teams were, how many undefeated teams we had. If Oregon had beat Washington, then you got 2 1-loss Pac-12 teams, and who are you going to choose there? So I think they got it right. You got to pick the conference champions. Otherwise, what's the point of playing those games? But you can also spin that of what's the point of Florida State playing their season and winning their championship game? So unfortunately, both Florida State and Georgia were just kind of on the shit end of the stick almost.
For sure. Well, let's get right to it, Jarreau. Let's talk about the 2 semifinal matchups and preview the 2 games. First up, we'll go with Washington and Texas. I'll do a kind of a brief overview and then let you kind of do your analysis. So you've got Washington, number 2, like I talked about, at the Pac-12 champion, 13-0. They won twice against Oregon, 2 very close games. So you talk about if even one of those games doesn't go their way, they may not even be in the playoff. The second time that they're in the college football playoff after 2016. And believe it or not, Pac-12 has historically, when we get into these discussions at the end of the year, gotten screwed. A lot of their Pac-12 champions have not made the playoff, and in fact, only Oregon and Washington have made the playoff from the Big 12, at least in this Pac-12, rather, at least in this 14 playoff format. And then on the other side, you've got Texas. They're 12-1 on the year, the Big 12 champion. Their only loss was to, at the time, number 12 Oklahoma in Week 6. Quinn Ewers, what a great quarterback, stellar quarterback. He transferred from Ohio State, so it kind of makes you feel like Joe Burrow when he transferred from Ohio State to your Tigers and kind of led them on a Cinderella run. Their big win, of course, they beat Alabama in Week 2, 34-24 in Tuscaloosa, so an impressive win for sure. And you've got Steve Sarkisian, longtime coach. He, in fact, coached under Nick Saban from 2019 to 20, so it's very possible that he could face his mentor here if they meet in the championship. But you look at these 2 teams, what do you like about Texas and Washington?
I think it's going to be interesting with the quarterback play. I think you got 2 elite quarterbacks, obviously 2 of the best in the country. That's why they're in the positions that they're at. I think the big difference maker in this is Texas's defense. Statistically, a top 10 defense across the board, across all categories. So I think that could have the potential to give Washington fits. But Oregon also had a very good defense, and Washington kind of seemed to do whatever they wanted. Washington, obviously, a great offensive team, a couple first-round receivers. Michael Penix probably going to be a first-round pick as well. But you got to think, is Texas's defense enough to stop those guys? Because I'm also not as high on Texas's offense as I am on Washington's offense. That's where I think you got a good Washington offense, you got a good Texas defense. They're going to kind of butt heads. So which one's going to be better? Is it going to be Washington's defense that steps up or Texas's offense? I think that's really going to be the key matchup here, because when you got elite versus elite, those are probably going to cancel each other out. I tend to lead with the underdog Washington here. They just kind of have that team of destiny vibes. Everyone counted them out. They were 9.5-point underdogs against Oregon in the Pac-12 championship. And I mean, that it didn't look like 9-point underdogs. So I think that's going to be very interesting. I think that's going to be one of the more exciting playoff games we will ever see. But unfortunately, based on numbers, one of these 2 games is going to be a blowout based on historical stats. So I don't know which one it's going to be, because I think these are probably the 2 best semifinal games that we've ever had collectively in the playoff era.
I was going to ask you, how funny would it be to you if in basically the last year of the Pac-12, Washington ends up winning it all? I mean, obviously you have all this conference realignment, which we'll get to here in a little bit, but I feel like that would be pretty funny for the Pac-12 to stick it to everyone on their way out. Washington ends up winning the whole thing.
Yeah, that would be a very funny thing. It would also be funny for Texas to win with them leaving for the SEC. So it's just funny that these are 2 teams that are leaving their conferences, that are going to step into different conferences that are going to challenge them. So I think this might be one of their last chances for a while to actually be in the playoffs. So they better take advantage of it this year.
And I wanted to ask you kind of a broader question. I guess it is about Texas, but really about some of these other schools like a Texas A&M, which obviously fired Jimbo Fisher. For me, I've just been baffled with, how dormant. I mean, especially in Texas. I mean, really, this is their first time being relevant since Vince Young led them to a championship back in '07 or whenever it was. You just think about it, great weather all year round. I mean, high school Texas is like, you talk about high school football. Texas is a breeding ground for that. You've got really, I mean, multiple schools in that state with great football traditions. Texas A&M, like I mentioned. Like, does it baffle you that Texas has taken this long to be good? I mean, with kind of all the resources and all of the positives that they have for their program.
It definitely has, but I think there's key factors of why things have been the way they've been. I think um, obviously Mac Brown is a legendary Hall of Fame coach. And once he left, it just seemed like there was a lot of coaching turnover. So it really shows how important coaches and coaching is at the college level. You're not dealing with NFL where they're all professionals. I mean, you look at the mainstays of college football these days. You look at Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Jim Harbaugh. Um, you got to be a good coach. Another good example of that is, and I think the expectations are very high on this guy, but Ryan Day, he took over Urban Meyer's program, and they haven't reached that success that Urban had, taking them to a couple national championships and winning them. But that just shows how important coaching is at the college level. But for Texas, there's a huge expectation on those kids too. You are playing for the state's university. That those colors run forever. I mean, there's a lot of money, there's a lot of pressure to play for the University of Texas. So I think that's played a huge factor, and Sark's done a good job of navigating this landscape of college football with the transfers and NIL. And I think now with the legal ability to pay the players and drop off bags for them, and they're investing in the right spots, the offensive lines, the defensive lines, and you get a quarterback and a couple receivers, and you let the rest play out. But I think it boils down to coaching ultimately.
So who are you picking between Washington and Texas? Seemed like you were picking the leaning Huskies. Is that where you're going?
I think I'm going to go with the Huskies. I think their offense is going to hit the ground running early. And I mean, Penix probably has a chip on his shoulder losing the Heisman to my guy Jaden Daniels. And he's got two first round receivers on him. And Kalen DeBoer is a winner, their head coach. He's at like a 70% winning percentage as a college coach, which is unreal. So I think in these situations, the winning coaches figure out ways to win. And I just don't think Sark has been in enough situations as of late.
I am going with the Longhorns. I think Texas, has been proven. I think the fact that they're coming into this game with one loss, I think, they've played in a game where they haven't played at their best, and it's cost them, and especially at home against Oklahoma, one of your big rivals. I think that's kind of motivated them. And I think what Sark has done in kind of a couple years to really bring Texas kind of back to the map of being nationally relevant is pretty key. So I'm going with the Longhorns. So we already disagree in the first semifinal matchup. Jarreau is going with the Huskies, and I'm going with the Longhorns. So I mean, we'll see. We're definitely going to at least have a different finals matchup here as we move to, I think, what is probably the premier matchup between these two. Alabama, number 4, against Michigan. Of course, Bama comes into this game 12-1. What else do you have to say about them? I mean, Nick Saban's the greatest college football coach ever. 7 national championships, 6 at Alabama, 3 of them in the college football playoff. Although it seems like it's been a while since they've won. I mean, they haven't won since 2020. So it seems like you've had a few years of kind of Bama not really being in the championship conversation. They had a bunch of ranked wins against Ole Miss, Tennessee. Unfortunately, you're LSU Tigers. And then, of course, they beat the number 1 2-time defending champion, Georgia, in the SEC title game, which snapped their 29-game winning streak. And, of course, everyone remembers Jalen Milroe, who I think has had a really nice bounce-back season considering all the criticism he was getting. He was benched earlier in the season. Leads Alabama to that to a 12-1 record. That 4th and 31 to Isaiah Bond, that throw. I mean, they wouldn't even be in the playoff if that doesn't happen. So I think he redeemed himself there. And then, of course, you got Michigan, the number 1 team in the country, 13-0. They beat Ohio State for the 3rd straight year, winning that game 30-24. Of course, ranked wins. against number 10 Penn State and number 16 Iowa in the Big Ten championship game. The thing that's been really in the news, I think, with them off the field has been the sign stealing scandal, which I'm sure we'll get to. We'll get into here in a little bit. Connor Stallions, one of their assistant coaches, was caught stealing signs from fellow Big Ten teams. Jim Harbaugh suspended the last 3 games of the regular season as a result of that. And then, of course, every year there's that question of will he or won't he stay? Because, Harbaugh is always getting interest from the NFL teams. So you look at this matchup, Jarreau, number 4, Bama, number 1, Michigan, like we talked about, the premier semifinal matchup on New Year's Day.
Yeah, I think this is a totally different type of game than the other game. The other Texas, Washington, 2 high-flying offenses, going to throw the ball around the yard a lot. This game, it's going to be a clash of 2 different styles of play. The Big Ten and Michigan, bully ball, run the ball, play good defense. And Alabama used to play that way. It's funny now that the way Nick Saban has adapted to the SEC and the spread and all that stuff. Now he's got a running quarterback. I think 10 years ago, if you would have told Nick Saban he was going to have a running quarterback, he would have just retired then. But he's done a great job of adapting. So I think that's going to be the key is Alabama probably hasn't faced a defense like Michigan, and Michigan probably hasn't faced an offense like Alabama. As good or as ranked as Ohio State was, I think everyone knew the quarterback play at Ohio State was not what they've had in the past years or at the elite levels of the other teams in the top 10. And same thing with Penn State. That was a gross game to watch between those 2 teams. I mean, Michigan ran 28 straight run plays in the second half. So I think it's going to be interesting. Alabama has a sneaky, very good defense this year. I think because they don't have the star power that they've had in the past, they have a lot of rising sophomores, a couple juniors, Dallas Turner. But I think that's going to be the big key is Michigan, number 1, going to be able to score? And number 2, will Alabama be able to run around and have Milroe be mobile like he's been in their big time wins?
And, I was curious because obviously we talked about Nick Saban, he's the greatest coach ever. He's in his 70s. Do you have a feeling that this might be, if not his last run, one of his few last runs, or do you think he's going to be coaching for a while and we're kind of just making a big deal out of it?
As an LSU fan, I hope this is his last season and he can go enjoy retirement and let someone else run Alabama. But there's been some times in the year where he's made some comments in the media and he seems happier this year. He seems smiley. He seems like he's just joking on the sidelines sometimes. And that's not the guy that we've seen the last 15 years. I wonder if he's trying to soak it all in this year and really enjoy what he's done at Alabama, because we'll never see a run like this in any sport like he's been. I mean, the Chiefs maybe have a chance to continue to do that. They've been to so many AFC championship games, but to win it so many times in a college football landscape that is evolving. I mean, he's probably been through 3 different eras of what we could say is college football. And now he's in the NIL and transfer portal stuff, and he's still kicking ass. So I would hope he goes out on top. I think he would seriously consider it if they won the championship this year. I think he would definitely have to go out as a champion. I don't think he could retire after losing a game.
And then, let's talk about the sign stealing scandal. I mean, like we talked about, assistant coach kind of accused of stealing signs from fellow Big Ten teams. And of course, people they've beaten Ohio State the last 3 years. Maybe it's made a difference. I wanted to get your take on it because you're the college football aficionado that you are. I guess my thing is just watching it from a bird's eye view. I'm not saying it's right, but my thing is look, he can steal all the signs he wants, but at the end of the day, the players have to go out there and execute. There's just a lot of factors. I don't know that this specific scandal is the reason that Michigan has been able to turn the tide and not only beat Ohio State, but be among the elite teams in the country. So that's kind of just my bird's eye view of it. What's your take? I mean, how much do you think in terms of impact that this had on them winning games the last couple of years?
Yeah, I've got 2 thoughts. First, it's like in baseball. There's nothing wrong with picking signs, trying to steal the third base coach's signs, but it's like the Astros. Once you get technology involved and you're using videos and you're using devices to help cheat, I think that's where we kind of cross the line. I think that's kind of been a standard opinion in the college football world is, hey, it's okay to steal signs, during the game. But the second you're bringing cameras and filming it, I think that's where we get into issues. And the second thing is, you're right. You can know the plays, but you still got to stop it. I mean, I watched the Monday Night Football game the other day, and Christian McCaffrey was watching, and he called out the exact quarterback draw that Jalen Hurts ran. So everyone on the field knows what's happening. You watch enough film. If they're in a trips bunch, they're going to run 3 or 4 different plays there. You just have to figure out which one it is. If you're bringing in 2 tight ends and an extra guard, you're probably going to run the ball. Football players are smart, and they watch a lot of film, and they have a good idea. But when you have a 290-pound defensive end, chasing after you, are you going to be able to stop that? If you have 2 guards pulling on you, are you going to be able to get through them and make the tackle? You still have to execute the play. It helps when you have a little bit of a step, but I don't think that part isn't a huge advantage as well.
So what do you think? I mean, what do you think the penalty should be? I mean, obviously Harbaugh has already been suspended last 3 games. He was suspended rather the last 3 games of the regular season. A couple of the assistants, lower personnel have gotten fired already. I mean, what do you think should be the penalty? If the NCAA finds that this really did impact games.
Yeah, I think you have to find that actual evidence. I think the Big Ten tried to probably suspend Harbaugh, and hopefully the NCAA would be like, oh, okay, well, the Big Ten took care of things. We don't have to do it. But we see with the other COVID recruiting stuff that Harbaugh is going through, they self-imposed the 3 games at the beginning of the season, and the NCAA still hasn't accepted that penalty. So I don't know that. Obviously, Harbaugh probably knew about it, but it's finding the evidence. You still have to have due process in court. It's just like any other criminal case. You have to find evidence, and if there's no hard factual evidence that Harbaugh was kind of instituting this or putting this in place, I don't know that you can really punish him. And honestly, I think if he does get punished, he's just going to bounce to the NFL.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you too. Was and I know that there's been reports that he's preparing to sign basically a lifetime contract in Michigan, a long-term extension, whatever you want to call it. But will he or won't he stay? I mean, this has been a question that it feels like every year we've been talking about. You look at the NFL jobs that could come open. I mean, the Chargers with Justin Herbert. I think any coach, despite how bad the Chargers have been, to work with a franchise quarterback like Justin Herbert, that's going to be big. He's got ties to the Bears. They may draft Caleb Williams with the number 1 pick and have 2 top picks in the top 5 or so. So, it seems like there are a couple of jobs out there that could be attractive. But what do you think? I mean, do you think he stays at Michigan, or do you think finally one of these jobs can lure him away to the NFL?
I think it's honestly got to be the perfect situation for him. As great as the Chargers, and I know we're getting into NFL talk, as great as working with Herbert would be, that's an old roster. With Keenan Allen in his 30s as your best receiver, and you're paying a lot of old guys a lot of money, and that would be a serious turnaround. Or you can stay in the college game working for a top 5 job in the entire country at Michigan. It's just kind of the work in the college football for coaches has just doubled with the transfer portal and the NIL stuff. You got to work that much harder. So I guess he's got to figure out, is it worth all that work, or you can go be in the NFL, where there's obviously way more rules and, you can do less things. I think he'll stay at Michigan ultimately.
Yeah, especially because Michigan's his alma mater. I mean, he went there. He's got the family ties. And I still think even with the amount of work that college football coaches have to do now with the transfer portal, they're still kind of their own boss. The NFL oftentimes, unless they give you personnel, say you've got to answer to a general manager, to an owner. I mean, in college football, you really are kind of the operations, so the CEO. So I think ultimately he stays in Michigan again, unless there's a crazy fine that happens as a result of this scandal. But I agree with you there. He will stay with the Blues. So let's make our predictions. Jarreau, Alabama, Michigan. Who do you have? And by the way, I will say, I'm sure you saw the reactions of the Michigan players when they saw they had to play Alabama. I mean, that's a pretty tough draw as the number 1 team to play a 4 team like Bama. So what do you think happens? Does Bama pull off the upset, quote unquote? Because it's hard to say it's an upset when you play Bama, or does Michigan go to the final?
This is going to pain me to say, but I think Alabama's going to crush them. I think it's my SEC homer. I got to root for the SEC, as even though it's LSU's biggest rival in Alabama, I this is the game I think could be a blowout because of Michigan's offense. I don't think they're going to be able to score at the pace that Alabama could. Um, Alabama isn't a dominant running team. They're going to throw the ball around, and I think that's where they could exploit Michigan. Is at their DB and safety spot, and Milroe being able to run as well throws another wrinkle into it. So if we had to pick a game that got out of hand, I think this could honestly be the game just because of how dynamic Jalen Milroe is.
Well, so you're actually kind of going reverse psychology because a lot of people are saying that this is going to be the best game of the two, but you really think, this could be the blowout of the two.
I think if we had to pick one of the two games to be a blowout, I think I could honestly see it being 28-3 Alabama at halftime, and Michigan not having any sort of offensive power. Just they haven't shown it. Against Penn State, a good defense, they didn't show it. Against Ohio State, they did okay, but obviously you're going to get up for that game regardless. So this is the game I could see if one of the two had to get out of hand. This is the one that I could see Alabama winning by 21 points. I'd like to see the alternate spread on that and might sprinkle a little bit on that one.
Nice. Well, I agree with you. I am going with the Crimson Tide, sweet home Alabama. I just think Nick Saban is the greatest coach of all time. And again, maybe people might accuse me of being a Jim Harbaugh hater, but it's not like he's really done much in the college football playoff last year. They should have beaten TCU. I mean, again, I think Georgia beats Michigan in the championship last year, but I don't think they might win by 10, 15 points. They're not blowing them out 62-7. Michigan should have beaten TCU. They don't. And I really think, again, not to be a hater, but Michigan's kind of this changing of the rivalry with them having more success against Ohio State has been in part because Urban Meyer retired. I mean, Jim Harbaugh has kind of had the advantage over Ryan Day. I just think against a superior coach like Nick Saban, I think he's going to be outmatched. To give Nick a month to prepare, he's the greatest of all time. He's going to have his guys ready. So I am going with Alabama. And again, also, I mean, you look at, their schedule. I was looking at it earlier. I mean, ECU, UNLV, Rutgers. I just feel like the Big Ten, at least Michigan in particular, didn't have a tough schedule or their conference was overrated. I mean, you follow the SEC closely. It's every week it seems like it's a dogfight. So I'm going with Alabama there as much as as much of a parity fan as I am. I just can't deny here. I think Crimson Tide are a better team. So in our championships, J-Rose got Alabama and Washington, and I have Alabama and Texas, which would be a rematch of the Week 2 game that Texas won. So in your hypothetical final, who wins?
It's gonna pay me to say it. Alabama is the team of destiny. That Auburn play should not have happened, and it happened somehow. And then you go out and you prove everyone wrong, saying, "Oh, they barely beat Auburn." Okay, well, we'll go beat Georgia, who's won 29 straight games. I just think this is Alabama's year. Milroe is probably the third most athletic quarterback in the country. I think they got some good receivers. A lot of those guys have been in big time games. That's also another factor. How are you going to react playing in a playoff game? You got Michigan and Alabama both have been there before. I think Alabama is going to have more guys and a little more seasoned, especially on the coaching side of things. But those Texas Washington guys, those guys have never played in an important game. They played in the Alamo Bowl 2 years ago against each other. That's about it. So I just see Alabama winning if I had to picture them playing against Texas or Washington.
So the last couple of days, kind of in preparation for this podcast, I've been thinking about my picks, and I had Texas and Alabama. So that hasn't changed. I was gonna go with Texas just because I think they beat them once in the regular season. I think that they've got the film. They know the blueprint to beat Alabama. They can beat them again in the final. But I think recently I've just changed my mind. I think I am going with Alabama. As much as it pains me to say it, I gotta agree with you, J-Ro. Nick Saban's the greatest coach of all time. He's been on this big stage. And again, you look at it, I don't remember what the record is, but I know that his former assistants have only beaten him like a handful of times. Kirby Smart beat him once in the championship. I think Jimbo Fisher beat him in the regular season. Outside of that, his former assistants cannot figure him out. I really like the story of Jalen Milroe, a guy who was criticized early in the season. But like you talked about, you look at some of these quarterbacks, he's not as athletic as Tua, but a guy like Jake Coker or A.J. McCarron, Jalen Milroe is more athletic than those guys, and Saban's finally got a running quarterback to his disposal. I think he's going to have a big game, and I think that Alabama will gain revenge against Texas and win the national championship. And I also believe, and I'm curious to get your take, what you kind of alluded to earlier, I think if Alabama wins the championship, Saban retires. What do you think? Do you agree with that take?
Yeah, I could definitely see that happening right away. Obviously, not probably that night like Peyton Manning did, but I think he would definitely soak it in that night and then make some sort of announcement. He's smart. He's calculated. If he was to make this decision, he would probably have a coach that he recommended or someone in waiting. We've actually kind of chatted about that a little bit. Some of the names, I don't know. That would be some extremely difficult shoes to fill.
For sure. So there you go. Both me and J-Ro agreeing for once that Alabama will win the national championship. J-Ro is going Bama over Washington. I am going Bama over Texas. But regardless, I think it's going to be an exciting semifinals and eventual finals. And I know both of us are going to be texting during it. So very excited to see how it plays out. I did want to ask you about that because you kind of alluded to this earlier. Is this the best 14 playoff ever? I mean, in this edition of the 14 playoff, do you think this is kind of the best combination that we could have had? I'm going to say yes, just because, again, there were 7 or 8 teams that you were talking about that if one game had gone a different way, they might have had the resume to get into the Final Four. Again, we don't know how the games are going to play out because, like you talked about it, statistically, at least one of these semifinal games is going to be a blowout. And if somehow both of them are good, then I feel like the final is going to be a blowout the way the cookie crumbles. But I just think going into the playoff, I don't think I've been more excited for a 14 playoff than I am this year. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think this is just in recent years for sure the best 4 teams. And you got to think if we're playing the hypothetical game, Jordan Travis doesn't get hurt, you throw Florida State in there. That's a pretty dang good team. Georgia doesn't lose to Alabama, you throw Georgia in there. That's a pretty dang good team. Oregon beats Washington in the Pac-12 championship. Oregon's a pretty dang good team. So I think you could have had 7 legitimate teams in this thing that could have won the whole thing.
And I wanted to ask you, of course, because next year is the 12-team playoff. Finally, after years of fans kind of complaining and all, college football officials kind of having their 2 cents, we are expanding. Just to kind of give you a rundown of how it will work, the 6 highest ranked conference champions would get the top 6 seeds. The top 4 of those would receive a first round bye to the quarterfinals. The higher seeds that are playing in the first round will have home field. So, let's just say, in my dream scenario, Virginia Tech makes the playoff. That first game would be at Lane Stadium at home. So that's going to be exciting for the fan bases to be able to play that game at home in the first round. So what are your thoughts about the 12-team playoff? And I guess my question is, do you think 1 or 2 will continue to win, but it's just better to have all these teams in the games? Or do you think, depending on a given year, maybe you could have a 6 or a 7 seed win a couple of upsets and win the whole thing? What are your thoughts on kind of how this 12-team playoff could play out?
Yeah, I'm not a hater like a lot of Twitter is with this 12-team expansion. I think it's awesome. I think it's just more football to watch. Obviously, some of the matchups that came out, we would have had another Georgia Ole Miss matchup. We would have had another matchup, Penn State versus Ohio State. That would have been a matchup. So obviously, you're going to get some repeat games, but a big time Saturday night game in the regular season of 2 top 10 teams is so much fun to watch. Now just imagine 4 of those all in one weekend. Yeah, you're probably only going to get seeds 1 through 6 that have a chance, but you never know. If Alabama loses against Georgia by one point this year and they're an 8 seed, I wouldn't discount Alabama against this year's field. That's the fun part about it is it just depends how you get hot. If when you lose, if you lose early, your ranking's probably not going to be as good. But that who's to say that? I'm going to play Homer here. LSU, yeah, their defense was trash, but Jaden Daniels can score 60 points every game. Who's to say they just can't get lucky against a bad offense twice and then they make it into the semifinal or the final just with pure offensive output. So I think it's going to be pretty exciting moving forward. We're just going to start debating those other seeds instead of the first 4.
Yeah, for sure. And I think people will probably not have as much of a problem because, again, when you're talking 10, 11, 12, they're unlikely to probably win the whole thing. Whereas, 5, 6, or 7, you don't know. They make it as the 4 seed. They may have a legitimate chance to win. So I do agree with you. I think 1 or 2 will probably continue to win, but it's just more fun to have more teams in the playoff. And then again, that first round, if you're a higher seed, you will have a home playoff game. So I think that's exciting And I guess I just wanted to ask, in terms of the state of college football overall. I mean, we've had so many changes the last couple of years: conference realignment, transfer portal. I wanted to go with you to the conference realignment first. I mean, of course, Texas and Oklahoma are going to the SEC. Washington and UCLA and USC and Washington State are going to the Big Ten. Of course, you got Stanford and Cal and SMU going to the ACC. So it's no longer the Atlantic Coast Conference; it's the All Coast Conference. But what are your thoughts on that? I mean, obviously, people are going to look at the TV money and say this is good for the game, but I just think it takes away from some of the local rivalries that teams have. I mean, obviously, Washington and Washington State are still going to play each other, but just geographically, I mean, it's going to be hard for uh, not only the teams to play each other, but just fans. I mean, you think about it. I think about Maryland because I'm from the Northern Virginia area all the time about how when they were in the ACC, their fans could go do a lot of weekend or day trips, go to Virginia, go to Virginia Tech. Now playing in the Big Ten, maybe you can do a weekend trip to Penn State, Ohio State, but other than that, I mean, you're going to have to pay more money and fly out to a lot of these places. So I think honestly, the fans ultimately get shortchanged the most. But what's kind of your take on sort of how conference realignment has been shaping up?
Yeah, unfortunately, football rules the college athletics because of the massive TV deals that are put in. Unfortunately, ESPN and CBS aren't paying billions of dollars to stream softball or women's basketball or baseball or golf, tennis. So those are the sports that are going to suffer the most from this. Football flies private. They charter their planes. Their players are going to be okay. It's the other sports. I think Chip Kelly said it the other day. The UCLA doesn't get to play Arizona anymore in softball. That's been a storied history of a rivalry for the last 30 years of those two teams being very, very good. And now you're not going to get that. You're going to get, UCLA playing Rutgers in the end of November. Those poor bus drivers having to drive the equipment trucks across the country in 2 days is going to be tough on them. But it's good. Again, as a selfish college football fan, we're going to get a lot more exciting matchups. Each weekend is going to have 3 or 4 premier games in it because of this, because you're adding more teams, better teams into better conferences. So hopefully we don't get any dud weekends. I think we maybe had 2 dud weekends this year, the way the schedule played out. But I think it's just going to make things much more fun. And I'm just trying not to take a negative outlook on it from a football standpoint. It just sucks for the other sports.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Jero, is that I think my biggest problem with college football now is the scheduling. I mean, again, you talk about it. I mean, I was looking at Alabama's schedule right now. They had 3 games that were just complete duds. Middle Tennessee State, USF, UTC. I mean, it's just teams kind of scheduling wins as a part of their schedule. I would like to see all these teams play, 9 or 10 or 12 Power 5 conference teams and just kind of to add more parity to the schedule. But that's kind of been my biggest beef with college football is that I just feel like, 2 or 3 of these weeks are just complete duds. You've got teams scheduling wins and, asking fans to pay money as if, this is a big time game.
Yeah, I think you can look at it that way, or you can look at it on the flip side. Florida State plays LSU in a non-conference game to start the season. Didn't do anything for them. They still were left out of the playoff. And from a G5 perspective, I mean, when I was at UNM as a student, we played Texas A&M and Texas Tech, and we made $4.5 million combined out of those 2 weekends. So that's how those programs have to survive. Tennessee Chattanooga has to go get their ass kicked by 70 points because Alabama's paying them $2 million, and that helps fund the rest of the athletic department. So I don't think you can completely eliminate those. I think 10 conference games would work, because then you can still play your 2 tune-ups, or Florida State can still play each other. You can still keep those kind of in-state rivalries where you can schedule those, but it's it didn't help Florida State out this year playing a tougher non-conference schedule.
I wanted to ask you too with the 12-team playoff. Do you think 3 losses is going to be the threshold now? Because right now in the 14 playoff, if you lose 2, you've got no shot. But the 12 teams, do you think? I mean, 3 losses, maybe 4, depending on who you lost to, or do you think it's 3 is kind of the minimum the maximum you have to lose, or else you have no shot at the playoff?
I think 3 is going to be that number. LSU was a 12 or 13 seed this year, and they had 3 losses. So I think that's going to really be the cutoff. You're going to see 5 SEC teams minimum in there, probably 3 or 4 Big Ten teams. You got to throw in your G5 top ranked team. So I think 3 is probably going to be the threshold. But with adding all these teams, there's probably not going to be as many undefeated teams when Ohio State and Michigan have just had to play each other, and Penn State, and that's have been the only 2 competitive games. Well, now you throw in Oregon, you throw in Washington. Those are, you throw in USC, UCLA. You got 4 more potential tough games compared to what you've done historically.
And then the other big component of college football now that's kind of sweeping everybody up is the transfer portal. I mean, obviously, it seems like, you kind of see it with Colorado a little bit in terms of being able to get a few players, impact players right away and make some noise. What's kind of your thoughts on the transfer portal? My thing is like, look, I'm all for player empowerment because at the end of the day, coaches leave all the time and oftentimes screw the programs, the way they leave them behind. Now the players are getting paid, so the big end stars are getting NIL money, which is great. But my thing is I just don't like it kind of during the season because I feel like you make a commitment to your team during the season, and then if things aren't going your way, to say, okay, hey, I want to transfer. I feel like you're kind of quitting on the team and breaking the agreement you made. So I don't really like it during the season, but again, I'm all for player empowerment, and you've seen a lot of these meaningless bowl games. I mean, if you're playing in a non-playoff bowl game, why do you want to risk injury? I mean, and you see a lot of these stars not playing. So what's kind of your thoughts on how the transfer portal has really changed the landscape of college football?
Yeah, it's definitely put a strain on coaches and the dynamic. I think you kind of got to coddle some of these stars a little bit more because you don't want them to transfer. There is some rules in place. Obviously, the one-time transfer rule for free. Honestly, I think there needs to be another level of rules involved in this. Some sort of contract. I know the NILs, they have their contracts with the players. So either backloading the money received, like, hey, you got to stick it out through the whole year to get your sum, or a front and back end deal. But with the push to pay the players more from a revenue sharing standpoint, that's when you're really going to make these players employees and not amateurs, and they are going to be put on contracts. And if you want to sign your revenue sharing contract, you have to do 2 years at a school. I think that would be probably fair. I just think it's also a part of society of if I'm not playing, I'm just going to transfer and go try to play somewhere else. Whereas, I don't know, some of those Alabama teams, those dudes didn't play the first 2 years, and then they go ball out their junior year and they're a first round pick. I think we're kind of losing that in the sense, and it's just a society thing too. But I think you gotta hold the players a little bit more accountable, because they're just, I think some of these guys entered a transfer portal just to put a transfer portal graphic on their social media to say they're in the transfer portal because they want the attention. And I think it starts at the recruiting level of posting every offer you get, and everything is so social media driven and outward facing that I think everyone wants to be in the spotlight, and that's kind of adding to the transfer portal stuff.
So be honest with me. I know you're a college football guy. You love watching college football, but how attractive is it to watch a lot of these non-playoff bowl games? I mean, you talk about it. A lot of the stars that are in these games are not playing. They're either in the transfer portal or they just don't want to play at all, sit out the game entirely. I was thinking about, I mean, Virginia Tech thankfully made a bowl game this year. I'll watch that game. They're playing Tulane, who their whole team is transferred basically because their coach took the job at Houston. But I was thinking about, I mean, outside of that, Georgia, a lot of the stars aren't playing in that Georgia-Florida State game. They don't have their backup quarterback, Florida State, to begin with. I just feel like, it's not as attractive to watch a lot of these non-playoff bowl games. And then when you talk about it, NFL, you got that going on. A lot of teams trying to make a playoff push last couple of weeks of the regular season. College basketball, there'll be some premier matchups kind of over the holidays. But I don't think I'm going to end up watching a lot of these non-playoff bowl games. How about you, being the big college football fan you are?
I think I will, because you get to see the guys that are going to play next year. I heard an interesting take that some of these guys, when you're losing your top quarterback and your receiver and a couple safeties and line guys, then you're playing the second string guys who are actually fighting for playing time for next year. So they're playing hard. I think Ohio's third string running back played the other day and he rushed for almost 200 yards. He hadn't played all season, but got to play in the bowl game. So I think that kind of makes it interesting. So I'm a college football sicko, so I'm going to watch as much as I can. Is it as exciting and entertaining? No, but I'm still going to watch because it is a good insight into next year. Like I'm super excited to watch LSU and watch Garrett Nussmeier take over the quarterback position because he's hopefully going to be our starting guy next year. So you kind of want to see how he does with the second string and third string receivers that he's going to be playing with next year.
I wanted to ask you one LSU question before you transition away from college football. How what were your thoughts kind of on the season? I mean, you had Jaden Daniels, the Heisman winner, but you talked about it. Their defense couldn't stop a cold. I mean, it was pretty bad. And of course, Brian Kelly, he's kind of he's not Jimbo Fisher in that he hasn't been at LSU forever and hasn't won anything. But you kind of start to think in a couple of years if they haven't done much, hey Brian, we're paying you all this money, you've got to start performing on the field and win more games. What was kind of your thoughts? I mean, again, you had maybe the most talented quarterback in the country in Jaden Daniels, but it was just weren't able to get over the hump. I know we texted before the season. It was going to be tough to beat Bama at Bama after you beat them at home last year. So there were going to be hurdles. It was going to be uphill climb to get get to the playoff rather. But were you frustrated? I mean, what was kind of your take on this season as a Tigers fan?
I think it's a different style of LSU football we've ever seen. Going back to that 2011 season against Alabama was 9-6 in the regular season, and then we met with them again in the national championship, and it was like 13-3. So I guess I'm so used to growing up watching the LSU teams with elite defenses. So it's different watching us with defenses that can't stop anyone. It seemed like every year LSU used to churn out a first round top 15 defensive back. And the last 2 or 3 years, I can't remember a defensive back that was even drafted from LSU. So I think that's the different part. It was super frustrating with the defense this year. I don't think they adapted in the game. I don't think there was in-game adjustments as far as counteracting what the other team was running. Which is just frustrating as a fan, whereas those guys are getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to make those adjustments, but I'm sitting at home watching it on TV, and I can see we probably should make some sort of adjustment. So I think we're trending in the right direction. Brian Kelly's done a good job with recruiting. I'm also realistic in the fact that we aren't a tier 1 college football program. We're not in Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan. Those are probably the 4 tier 1 teams. And then you got a bunch of tier 2s, LSU, Oregon, you throw in USC, Texas, Florida State. We're in there. We're going to, every 6 years, we're going to win a national championship. And I'm totally fine with that. Florida State's like that. Auburn's like that. Florida used to be like that back in the day. So I think it's the realistic expectations that right now we just got out of the Nick Saban era. And we're moving into the Kirby Smart era, 2 of the greatest, programs we've seen in college football history. So you got to just sneak one out every now and then. It is a shame we wasted a season like we had with Jaden Daniels because it would have been so much fun to see him play against a Michigan or an Alabama or a Texas or a Washington. So outlook is good. We just got to keep getting better defensively and keep the offensive power up. Because back in 2011, I would have loved to have Jaden Daniels and not Jordan Jefferson running quarterback draws and run pass options. And now it was just weird seeing an LSU quarterback throw, even with Joe Burrow a couple of years ago. It was just weird seeing a guy be able to throw for 300 yards when we've had so many talented receivers over the years.
What do you think is Jaden Daniels' NFL outlook? And I know it might be hard on the spot, but is there a team that you think maybe, I guess he's going to be a later round pick, but if they kind of draft him, he's a backup, give him a few years to start. Is there a team that you think could be a good fit for him?
I mean, a lot of the mocks I'm seeing have him in as the third quarterback taken behind Drake May and Caleb Williams. Unfortunately, that's just kind of how the offseason works. Is he's going to have a pro day and he's going to go to the combine and he's going to climb up the draft boards, just like Zach Wilson did, just like Anthony Richardson did, just like Trey Lance did. When I don't, I'm not saying he's not going to be a good NFL quarterback, but he is not the prototypical NFL quarterback. He's not going to be able to outrun some of those guys in the NFL. You see Bryce Young doing it. He has gotten sacked so many times from behind by defensive tackles that run the same speed as him, but in college he was able to evade those guys. So I think that's going to be the biggest thing for him. You got a lot of teams that are going to need a quarterback. The Saints, the Giants. I would love to see him in a Bucs uniform. I think Baker has solidified. But if I'm the Bucs drafting at 15 and Jane Daniels is there, I wouldn't not draft him. I think sitting a year, like you said, and kind of learning the NFL game. Unfortunately, a lot of these rookies are thrown in so quickly. I think, like, what if Mahomes had played his rookie year and not sat behind Alex Smith? Is he still the same Mahomes that we see now? Maybe. Same thing with Rodgers. If Rodgers had played right away, I think some of these guys are getting. I think Bryce Young has been ruined this year by having to play right away. So he needs to go to a place that he can sit behind a veteran, kind of learn, maybe get a little bit of in-game experience, do a little mop-up duty, injury duty. But I'm pretty excited to see him in the NFL.
Well, let's go to the NFL now. I got to ask you about your Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You mentioned it. You're a Bucs fan, and I think they've been a pleasant surprise this year. I mean, 7-7 tied for first in the NFC South. They've got a big game against the Saints this weekend, who are also 7-7. I think it's pretty safe to say that game will determine who wins the division. But Baker Mayfield, I'm happy for him. I think he's a guy that people are like, oh, he's overrated. You know, after he left the Browns, he hasn't done anything, bounced around a few teams, but he's found a home with Tampa, and he's kind of a game manager, doing enough to win and not not snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. You still got Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I think that's a pretty solid receiving duo. Maybe Todd Bowles is a good coach after all. I mean, once he got Brady out and retired, he's kind of been able to lead his own team. So what's been your thoughts on the Bucs? Like I said, a pleasant surprise that they're at first in this division.
Yeah, it's definitely been a roller coaster season. Obviously, we had Brady. He wasn't at the top of his game like he was there in the middle of his career with the Patriots, but he did enough to win games. And we really leaned on that defense. And this year, the defense has just not played up to par. The secondary hasn't been what it's been. Vita Vea has been hurt. Kalijah Kancey has really stepped up as a rookie. Devin White not even playing. He's a healthy scratch. So I think the defense is the baffling part because the Bucs defense has been so good under Bowles and Arians even in the past 3 or 4 years. So Baker's done a good job. He's done enough to win. He's going to have his highs. He's going to have his lows. He's going to be more average than anything. So you kind of just got to take it for what it is. He's not going to go out there and be Mahomes and make all sorts of crazy plays because that's just not who he is. But he's a veteran in the league. He's played a lot of football. He knows what he's doing. So hopefully he can keep it up and keep up the solid play and kind of just that this term's been thrown out a lot as like the game manager. He is a perfect game manager because he's going to do what he needs to do to win the game.
What are your thoughts about the MVP race? I mean, I think about it, Jarreau. This might be the most wide open MVP race I can think of in recent NFL history. I mean, you don't really have one guy that's kind of clearly ahead of the pack. I think you've got 3 or 4 guys that are kind of bunched in there together. I was just looking at MVP odds. You got Brock Purdy leading the pack at -200, then Lamar Jackson. Obviously, those 2 teams are the best teams in their respective conference. Josh Allen, of course, the Bills are trying to fight to get to the playoffs, but statistically, he's probably been the best quarterback in terms of if you look at the numbers. Dak Prescott, the Cowboys have been a solid team. Christian McCaffrey, Purdy's 49ers teammate, he's been spectacular. Tua Tagovailoa, Tyreek Hill, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, they're all kind of in that next tier. So if you had to say right now before week 16 of the NFL season, who would you think is your pick right now to be the MVP?
I'm going to defer and say whoever wins the Niners-Ravens matchup this weekend between Purdy and Lamar. Obviously, with how the Niners are playing, you kind of got to lean Purdy. He's not the sexy pick, but he's also leading the league in almost every statistical quarterback stat. So he's obviously doing the right things. He is game manager. He's got a lot of weapons around him, but to utilize those weapons. You still got to throw them the ball when they're open. You still got to do the things that you need to do. But I think it's going to come down to this weekend or potentially one of those two quarterbacks having just a monster game in the last couple of weeks of the season and kind of having his MVP Heisman moment in that sense of one of those guys, whoever just goes off in the next 3 weeks is probably going to get the voters vote down the stretch.
I agree with you. I think it's the winner of the Ravens Niners game. I'm a little biased because Lamar Jackson is my favorite player, so I'm a pseudo Ravens fan. But I do think whoever wins that game could do it. But I also will say I do think with how spectacular CMC has been, you may have a situation where Purdy and Christian McCaffrey kind of draw votes away from each other, and that maybe elevates a guy like Lamar Jackson. I also thought this was the year maybe a guy like Tyreek Hill could win the MVP because, again, no quarterback has really stood out. And you've seen, I mean, when Tyreek is not playing, how bad the Dolphins' offense looks. But I think the fact that he missed a game, that's probably going to dock him in terms of the standing in the conversation. So I agree with you. I'm leaning Lamar, but I think a lot of it rides on this Christmas night game, Ravens-Niners. So I'm excited to watch that game. Do you have a Super Bowl prediction? Again, I feel like it's been a wide open year. You've got kind of teams that have been on the high, been on the low, but Ravens leading the AFC right now, the Niners in the NFC. Who do you think, if you had to say right now, makes the Super Bowl in February?
Oh, I think the Niners with the Eagles' struggles have really just solidified themselves as the best team. They whooped the Eagles, they whooped the Cowboys. Just two big time wins. They've been there before. You know how important that is in the playoffs. Who's been there. I mean, I think they want a little revenge after last year with Purdy going down against the Eagles. And in the AFC, I'm never going to bet against Patrick Mahomes until he proves me otherwise. There's just something about them. I feel like every year we have a similar conversation of like, oh, the Chiefs don't look the same. Obviously, their receiver play has not been what it's been in the past 5 or 6 years. You still got Kelsey. You still got a couple good running backs, and I think that's important down the stretch too. When you're playing winter football, December, January football, you got to be able to run the ball. And I'm just never gonna discount Mahomes. I think whenever he's on the field, his team has a chance to win.
I agree with you on the NFC side. I'm going to say the Niners represent the NFC, and I'm going to stick with the Ravens in the AFC. I think Lamar Jackson is on a mission. Obviously there were this whole contract situation in the offseason. A lot of teams apparently didn't want to sign him. I think he's proven a lot of those haters wrong. I honestly think you could make a case behind Mahomes. Lamar's at least the most winning quarterback in terms of if you look at his regular season stats, how often he's able to win when he's healthy. I think he's on a mission this year, and again, that I think it's changed the fact that he's got the first round. Only one team gets the first round bye, so I think Chiefs have to go on the road. And again, I mean, Kadarius Toney, he drops balls left and right. I don't know if I trust that receiving core outside of Travis Kelce. So I do think the Chiefs will struggle this year. So I would say this Christmas night game is going to be with the Super Bowl preview, Ravens and Niners. So we'll see what happens there. To close out the conversation, I kind of wanted to go back to this topic, a couple of topics actually that I think we've kind of discussed before, but I want to hear your take on. And that is first, Tom Brady. Obviously he's a guy that you're a fan of because he led your Bucs to a Super Bowl. I have a hot take on this. I don't think Tom Brady is the GOAT. He is the luckiest of all time, and let me explain. I mean, if you look at most of his Super Bowls, let's be honest, he had some all-time great luck. The Tuck rule, we know if they change that rule, the Raiders win that game. You've got obviously Malcolm Butler's interception at the 1-yard line. Everyone knows Pete Carroll should have run the ball with Marshawn Lynch. I mean, that's the worst call of all time. You've got the Falcons choking when they were down 28-3. Let's be honest. I mean, they should not have lost that game. The Chiefs had look, the Bucs defense was great, and I actually think the Bucs defense was the MVP of that Super Bowl, not Tom Brady. But the Chiefs, I mean, a great offensive team when they had Tyreek and Travis Kelce. They just had an all-time bad performance. You also throw in Deflategate, Spygate. I mean, a lot of tainted history in Tom Brady's past. Again, I'm not saying he's a bum, he's a scrub, he can't play. I just think he is not the GOAT. He is the luckiest of all time. What do you say about all that?
I mean, those are valid points, but you still have to put yourself in those situations. He put his team in those situations. Football, I think, unlike any compared to basketball, where you get a lot of the GOAT stuff, is that's the hardest position in sports to play. So to put yourself in a Super Bowl 9 times as a quarterback, as a starting quarterback, it's hard enough to get there all the time. I mean, as great as Mahomes is, and I think Mahomes is talented enough, how come he hasn't willed his team to win as many times as he's gotten that far? Obviously he's got the 2, but Brady's got the 2 losses to the Giants, which is unfortunate luck. I mean, a lucky catch. You can say the luck with the David Tyree helmet catch. So I think to say he's the luckiest of all time, I don't know about that. But if you're not gonna call him the GOAT, then who is your GOAT?
I'm gonna go Joe Montana. I think he's 4-0 in the Super Bowl, 11 touchdowns, no interceptions. At that time, I mean, NFL, they had no roughing the passer. Again, I mean, Tom Brady's on the Mount Rushmore. I think he's a top 3-4 quarterback. I just think Joe Montana, in my opinion, would be the greatest of all time. And I think Mahomes has a chance. I mean, if he continues to play well, to maybe take that mantle. But I guess, what about you? I mean, I'm assuming Brady's your GOAT, but who would you say would be another guy?
I mean, Montana's probably another conversation. Montana also had the greatest wide receiver of all time on his team to throw the ball to. So yes, Brady had Gronk, but the tight end position is much different than the receiver position. I don't think Brady's played with another Hall of Fame player besides Gronk.
Randy Moss, but I mean, they didn't win the Super Bowl that year.
Sure. Yeah. He got Randy at the end of his career. So I think Brady's done more with less. And yes, he's had very good defenses, but you can't fault the guy for having a good defense. It's not his fault. But he had to come. I mean, how many other quarterbacks would be down 28-3 and still think that they have a chance to win? I mean, that solidified things for me, that he's the GOAT, that he staged that comeback and had the will and the drive. And listening to some of the interviews with him, they never even considered that they were going to lose that game. You're down 25 in the third quarter and you don't think you're going to lose? I mean, I just don't think that there's another quarterback that would have that same mentality.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a good point. But I did want to ask you, because you were talking about Saban earlier. Who has a more impressive career, Nick Saban in college or Bill Belichick in the NFL?
How has Bill Belichick done with Brady, without Brady?
It's a good point. Good point.
Nick Saban, obviously college and NFL, way different. Nick Saban won a national championship with Greg McElroy. And he's taken Jake Coker to the national championship. And yes, there's been a lot of talented players in Bama, but to do it on the level that he's done it, where you're turning over the roster year in and year out, I think it just proves Saban's never lost more than 2 games in a year, right? And look what if Belichick was a super coach. I mean, they both had the same quarterback this year. Mac Jones played for Nick Saban. Mac Jones has played for Bill Belichick. Who's utilized him better?
That's fair.
I think Belichick had a great run, and I think Brady was a big part of it. Yes, he's still a great coach, but I think Brady was the catalyst of those teams back in the day.
I agree with you. I'm going to lean Saban just because we were talking about earlier how he's kind of been able to be successful in different eras of college football the way some of these guys like Dabo or Jimbo Fisher have not been. So I'll give the edge to Saban, but I do want to say in Bill Belichick's defense, he's got to deal with a salary cap in the NFL. There's limitations on who he can bring. I mean, Nick Saban can pretty much bring in whoever he wants, and with the board of visitors that Alabama has, he's going to be able to dish out a lot of money. And again, you look at a lot of the Super Bowls that him and Brady won together. I mean, that defense played a huge role. Tom Brady was not the one that held the Rams to 3 points. And a lot of those first 3 Super Bowls that they won, it was a lot of the defense kind of leading the way and Brady sort of being in that game manager role. So I lean Saban, but I do think Bill has kind of gotten a lot of flack for the season one. Even if you look at it, the previous couple of years, they either made the playoffs or they just barely missed. Like they had a couple of 1-possession games that didn't go their way. Otherwise, they would have been in the playoffs. So I do think Bill has kind of taken some heat unfairly this year. Again, a lot of stuff is his fault, but I think like, look, this guy is a great coach. I mean, he doesn't have Brady, but he knows football. So I guess I want to ask that question because there's been reports that the Patriots are going to let him go at the end of the season. Is there a team out there that you think would be a good fit? I mean, I was thinking about the Commanders are out there, the
You just
Chargers.
want me to you
Yeah.
want me to say the Commanders, huh?
I mean, I think honestly, if it were me, I'd say the Chargers. I mean, you've got the quarterback, and that's been your issue the last couple of years. You fix that defense. I think he's a great defensive coach. I think the Chargers, even with Mahomes being in the division, even with the AFC being stacked, I think the Chargers, even though I think Commanders in a lot of ways with their new ownership, they may give him personnel say makes sense. I just think the quarterback is not even a question. Take the Charger job if it's offered to you.
Yeah, I think the Charger job is definitely the most attractive one. But like I mentioned earlier, with their cap issues that they're having, their aging roster, and they've kind of gone all in the last couple of years, and it hasn't exactly paid off. The Chargers just have a stink to them. They have a curt. They charger themselves a lot, so I don't know that it's as attractive. And you still got to bring the coaching because Bill's a defensive guy. So just because you got the quarterback, you still got to put in the right pieces, which I think has bit him in the butt with drafting, with his having Matt Patricia be the offensive coordinator a couple years ago. I think that is the big question marks that Bill has had is his draft history and his coaching hires.
So, but between Chargers and Commanders, who would you take? Because those are the two I think that have kind of been thrown out the most.
I think the Commanders probably because he will have a little bit more freedom, sticking to the East Coast. He has ties to the Maryland area. I think that would play a big portion of it. But I could also see if they do part ways of Bill just retiring. I mean, he's old too, just like Saban. That I would not be shocked if Bill Belichick retired at the end of the year.
That's definitely a great perspective to have. And my final question for you, kind of sums up this podcast. And again, I'm not expecting you to come over to my side, but I'm curious to see if you have maybe come a little bit closer to my side. And that is, which do you think is better between the NFL or college? And let me say up front, I think this was probably the best year of college football that I can remember. I mean, you talked about it. We had 7 or 8 teams that were kind of in the playoff mix. I don't think that's been the case every year. You look at it. I mean, look, we won't deny a regular season Alabama Auburn game rivalry is way better than say Commanders Cowboys. But I just think in terms of parity in the NFL, I mean, again, you talk about it this year. I really don't think we can name a clear favorite. I mean, maybe you want to say the Niners, but I think there's a lot of kind of tier 2, tier 3 teams that really have a shot in a win or go home format to win it all. You talk about the addition of fantasy football. I mean, you're watching Saints Raiders tomorrow, even if you don't care about the game because you have a fantasy player playing. I just think the average fan, they're going to know who Patrick Mahomes is. They may not necessarily know the quarterback for Alabama because, they may not have gone to Alabama or they may just not follow it. And again, these players keep changing every year. So I just think, again, I think college football made great progress this year. The 12-team playoff is only going to make things better. I still say, though, the NFL is better. But what do you think? I know you're probably going to say college football, but have you kind of come over maybe to my side a little bit more last couple of years?
I mean, I grew up always liking the NFL more. And as I've gotten older, I think it's a little bit more fun for me to follow the college football stuff because of recruiting and transfers and just the wide variances of offenses run and defenses run. As there's not a true clear favorite in the NFL this year. Man, some of these primetime games have been brutal to watch. I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of Thursday night football. I just think the play during those games, those guys coming off a 3-day rest is not beneficial to anyone, and they tend to be stinker games. I was having a discussion with my buddies. I think the quarterback play outside of those 5-6 elite quarterbacks, the Mahomes, the Burrows, the Allens, the Hurts, I think this is the worst crop of quarterbacks that the NFL has put out there. And it's just so tough watching some of these teams play and the lack of innovation, but it also is because of how good the defenses are. You can't run the college stuff in the NFL, just like you can't run the NFL stuff in the college because of the type of athlete that you're dealing with. So I just think the college game is more exciting. obviously the football is much better at the National Football League level, but they're also professional. So I think I kind of enjoy that margin of error at the college level of a blown coverage on a safety because he looked at the wrong signal on the sideline, where that would never happen in the NFL. So I think it's definitely a whole lot more fun to watch college, but it's a better product NFL wise. But man, those Saturdays, that first Saturday in September, when I get my 3 TVs lined out and I'm watching from 10 a.m. all the way till Pac-12 after dark. Rest in peace. Those are the fun days for sure.
And then really quickly, because we really didn't talk about it, but Deion Sanders, I mean, he's taken college football by storm. Colorado has kind of been they started 2-0, but I think as most people expected, although whoever bet money on them winning the championship, they just donated to the casino. But they kind of tailored off as people expected, but I think people are expecting them to continue to make some noise. Maybe Deion can grab some guys in the portal. Who knows? Maybe he may even jump to an SEC school eventually. But what's kind of your take on the whole Colorado phenomenon, and how do you think it's going to move forward in the next couple of years?
I mean, I think it was good for the growth of college football. Did I like it? Not really. I thought it was a little bit too much at times. I mean, you look at the first 2 wins, TCU and Nebraska, both teams not bowl eligible. So how good were those wins? I think the preseason ranking stuff is garbage. Everyone going crazy over at TCU. Oh, they lost the national championship game. Yeah, they also lost 7 of their 11 starters from last year on the offensive side of it. That was a completely different team. You can't judge one year to the next. So I think they got a little bit of humble pie there after that Stanford game, and they really just couldn't figure it out. And the true college football diehards who watch every week realize that their offensive and defensive lines are not up to par with anything even in the Pac-12, and now moving to the Big 12, I think they're going to struggle even worse unless they can really do something. Shedeur, as a good college quarterback, do I think he's the 4th overall pick like Mel Kiper had him early in the season? No. Travis Hunter, he will be a top 5 pick because he can do things both ways. So it's good for the game. I thought it was a little annoying. I think the Twitter ate it up like crazy, and I get they haven't been very good, but there's a lot of other programs that had great turnaround. South Florida won 2 games last year, and they were bowl eligible this year. Your Virginia Tech team was terrible last year, and now they're bowl eligible. I think there's a whole lot more stories that were better, but it's because of the Deion Sanders effect, and rightfully so. He was one of the greatest to ever do it, so he's going to get that attention that he deserves.
Jarreau, this has been such a pleasure having you back on the podcast, previewing the playoff, talking big picture college football, some NFL stuff too. Thanks so much for chatting, man. It's always a pleasure catching up with you.
Appreciate you having me on. Go Bama, I guess. I have to root for them, but very excited to watch the games the next couple weeks.
Yeah, for sure. Both of us picked Alabama to win the college football playoff, so we'll see what happens when the semifinal starts on New Year's Day. But thank you so much to Jacob Jarreau, my former colleague with the Lacrosse Loggers, Albuquerque resident, BSN employee, for joining me on the latest edition of The Post with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. We thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Happy holidays. Enjoy the college football playoff and the upcoming NFL playoffs.